pod bay doors, please, Hal.
The pod bay doors are open. Thank you very much for joining us once again. I'm your host, Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com, here with my co-host, as always, Jerry Dean Roberts, film critic for ArmchairCinema.com, ArmchairOscars.com, and OverThinkingOscar.wordpress.com. Jerry, how are we doing today?
I'm sorry. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the concept of sweet lentil balls. Today's movie, you got to know this. Today's movie, there's a scene where there's a confectioner who's selling sweets, and one of the things he's selling is sweet lentil balls. And
And sweet cheese balls.
and when I was watching that, I can work with. Sweet lentil balls, I can't work with. That stopped me for like a day and a half because I could not wrap my lentils are this hell-spawn disgusting thing to me, and I can't imagine trying to make a dessert out of them. Sorry, it's just
Well, try being disparagingly poor and then see what you can make work for you.
right. That is very true. That is very true.
Today
That's my Western complaint.
Today we're talking about Satyjit Ray's Apu Trilogy. It consists of his first two films, Pather Panchali and Aparajito, or Aparajito. I have heard people from India say it both ways. And
Forgive
Apur
our
Sansar.
Western pronunciation of these things.
and Apur Sansar, which all three translate to Pather Panchali is Song of the Little Road, Aparajito is the Unvanquished, and Apur Sansar is the World of Apu, based on two novels by Bengali author, and I apologize in advance, Bibhut Basan Bibhutabis Husan Banerjee. I apologize greatly. I do not speak Bengali.
I would not have gone down that road. I admire you for trying. I would not have gone down that road myself.
Like I was telling you just before we started recording, just last week, I listened to Ray's memoir, My Years with Apu, which ended up being his last work of any kind because the final version was stolen from his hospital room while he was dying. So
That's terrible.
his widow had to go back through a first draft of half completed sentences, sometimes half completed words, and piece this thing back together so that people could experience it. And it was read by uh, an Indian, and so I was trying to get pronunciations from him and ended up missing maybe half of the book. So I had to, because I would try to say them back, had to go back and re-listen to parts.
I want to ask you though, when was the first time you ever heard of Satyjit Ray?
Ah, um, I was in a world film history class in the spring of 2000 when I first saw Pather Panchali, and that was the first time I think I'd heard of Satyajit Ray, or Satyajit, however you say his name. I apologize again. Um, that was the first time I'd heard of him, and the first time I'd seen any of his films.
The very first time I ever heard of Satyajit Ray was on the Academy Awards in 1993, back when they used to do these things. Um, they gave him an honorary Oscar,
Hmm.
and he was at home and he was dying. He died several months later,
Hmm.
and it was his tribute was introduced by Audrey Hepburn,
Hmm.
and that was the first time I'd ever heard of him. That was the first time I'd heard of the World of Apu. That was the first time I really understood or seen anybody actually point out to me that India had a film industry.
Mm.
And I remember during the tribute, they did the film package.
Hmm.
Just all these wonderful images, and
He had a gorgeous eye. He had a
he did.
beautiful, beautiful, well, he had the eye of an artist, which he was.
But I remember there were some images that stuck in my mind from the tribute to World of Apu, or the Apu Trilogy, basically, that just stood out. And as I'm watching the trilogy over this past week, I'm looking for those images and trying to associate them with where they fit
Hmm.
in the film. And they are striking,
Oh yeah.
and they stay on your mind.
Hmm.
Um, but this had been, I'll be honest with you, the Apu trilogy has been in the outfield of my I'll get to it. I just had not gotten around to it. I'm
Well,
glad I did.
I kicked it up higher on your list.
Yeah, I'm glad I did.
I'm glad you
Netflix
did
didn't
too.
help because
This would have been a short episode if you had gotten to watch them.
Netflix didn't help because um, Pather Panchali and Aparajito were available. The World of Apu was not.
Which is weird because they're all in the Criterion Collection.
Yeah, the World of Apu was not. I had to rent the World of Apu from iTunes, and thank you iTunes because they have all three of them.
Yes, they do.
Um, but I guess we should start with Pather Panchali.
Yeah.
In anything like this, I'm always you do have to remove yourself from your own expectations. We go to the movies every week and we see um, mostly American images,
Hmm.
American filmmaking, American type filmmaking, and the American culture. This is completely removed from that.
Oh, entirely. This is uh, Padre Panchali is set in the mid 19 teens.
Yeah, sometime in the early 20th century.
Because I know when they move to the city,
It's 1920.
it's 1920. So and he's about 10. So he was born in about 1910. So this actually starts a little bit before that.
And he's born 5 minutes into this movie.
Yeah, he's not even there at the beginning.
Right.
Uh, he so this shows up. This starts. Actually, I think it starts a few years earlier because Durga is much younger than she is when he's born.
Right.
Time elapses very quickly and very slowly in this movie.
Mm.
Um, but you get this sense of this rural Bengali village and this, what you find out later, is an ancestral home for a previously much wealthier family.
Now, when we say home, we're not talking about a house.
It's a compound with a
Yeah.
veranda and a wall around it and two shacks. One of them's a like that could serve as like a guest cottage for the auntie, who is a tenuously related at best to the father, is
Like
really
right in the
like
middle of it,
a
like right, in the,
cousin or something. She's very old.
like right in the middle of it is like a well.
Mm-hmm. And there's a veranda where people spend most of their time. There's a kitchen. It's a very it'll take you a minute if you're not used to seeing movies from other locations that have different concepts of dwellings.
One thing I always make note of is the placement of this film because anybody who knows the world outside of Western borders probably does not realize if you're in America and you're poor, you probably still have a home. Um, and this is not, I'm not talking exclusively about these people, I'm talking about in this culture. People who live in the projects are poor, but they live indoors in a home. In these countries, when you're poor in these countries in India and other parts of the world, sometimes when you're poor, you live in the middle of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when you do have money, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're living like in a mansion.
It just means that you're not dying
It just
slowly
means
every
that you're
day.
not dying.
Yeah.
So the concept of poverty is shocking to someone who doesn't live in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
We think of the poor as people, you know, in our imagination we think of the poor as people who live in the bad part of town, in projects and things like that. They would love to live in a situation like that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I hope I don't sound confusing, but it's like in other parts of the world, when you're considered poor, you're living in the dirt. You are literally down to nothing.
Right. Because what is it when Durga comes back? She has to sweep the yard,
Yeah.
and it's all dirt.
Mhm.
Like it seems like it would be an impossible task because there's no way to clean because it's not concrete. It's a dirt
You can't clean dirt.
it's a dirt yard. Yeah, you can't. How do you sweep that? It's like that's
All you can do is make the dirt neat.
yeah. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, that's not something that I would probably have my kid do, but that's a chore,
Mhm.
And she was in trouble for stealing fruit from the orchard that used to be belonged to the family, but
Mhm.
they had to sell because they needed the money.
Yeah.
Um,
And then
this,
and then like I was talking about at the beginning, the confectioner that goes by
mm-hmm,
when he's talking about he's selling sweet cheese balls and the sweet lentil balls and things like that. And the kids are practically drooling, but they
mm-hmm,
can't afford it.
mm-hmm,
And the reason they can't afford anything like that is because the father is well-meaning but extremely unstable. He is always away, and he's always looking for work, and their fortunes rise and fall,
mm-hmm,
but they mostly fall.
mm-hmm.
And the mother, God bless this actress, she, I think the direction this poor actress was given was when you're not actually working, sit down and look off in the middle distance. because I think that's basically her role in this series.
Sarabaja, played by Karuna Banerjee, she is magnificent.
She is,
Um,
but there's more than 12 scenes of her just kind of stopping what she's doing, and her head goes down and she looks sad.
wouldn't you?
But it's what's interesting is, and I thought about this. There's a scene at the beginning when she's unfolding the laundry, and she kind of turns her head sort of toward the camera, and her head goes down, and she just kind of looks sort of reflective, and I thought literally the weight of the world is on her shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
But that I don't know if Ray can meant that, but literally she kind of goes down.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the weight is on her.
Mm-hmm.
But I laugh about it because they do that several times. It's like she just kind of looks off and she looks reflective. There's the woman is I don't think she's ever really happy, and she doesn't ever have a reason to be
No,
because
she
her
really,
husband
she really
is
doesn't.
unstable.
Yeah, he's going off because he can earn more money outside of this village.
He's a priest.
Right, and so he picks up money doing odd jobs. He does priest work for money, things like that. That
Donations from the pilgrims.
right. So her idea really is leave this ancestral home of his
Mhm.
and go to the city, which is by the Ganges, for him to make more money, make an actual living off being a priest down by the Holy River. And that's what she wants them to do.
Right.
But he doesn't because this is his ancestral home. But he does not make enough money for the upkeep. There's one scene where the mother throws out Durga, the sister, the daughter, throws her out the door, but we're watching the scene through a hole in the wall.
Hmm.
It's like the door is symbolic because it's unnecessary.
Right.
So there's this almost like he doesn't want to go somewhere where he will have to work
Mhm.
or where he will have to stay at home. Uh, he seems very wanderlusty and just very difficult to pin down, which is something that Apu ends up with.
Apu's not in this a lot. He's around, but the center of the film is not on him.
No, it's more he's the observer
Mhm.
and is kind of told through his eyes eventually, sorta.
Yeah, there's a scene where the sister wakes him up, and he's got a blanket over him, and she opens this little circle, and you see his eye. That's one of those images that I saw in the tribute that just
Mm-hmm.
captivated me. Um, sort of born into the world and just observing it. Um, he's not a big now in the other two, he is the main focus because he's
Mm-hmm.
grown up. But
Mm-hmm.
in this one, he's around it. His eyes are seeing what's going on, but he's not part of it because he's so young.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Durga has more of the plot because she there's a very touching, very heartbreaking moment when she is accused of stealing a necklace.
Mm-hmm.
The neighbor comes over and confronts the mother about it. And there's a break in whatever friendship they had before. Um, it's sad because Durga dies later on.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the movie, um, Apu, as they're leaving, finds the necklace.
Right. So she did steal it, but
She
then
did steal it,
so he goes and throws it in the.
preserving her sort of legacy in the
Hmm.
family.
So he throws it into the river or into the
Yeah, the
lake or
pond.
whatever by the pond. Yeah. So that nobody ever finds it.
And the neighbor comes over as they're leaving and tries, I think, to patch things up a little bit because there's been some bad blood.
Hmm.
It's like saying, "I know your circumstances are bad. I don't want there to be any bad blood here." That's what I got.
Hmm.
That's what I understood. But it's like Apu is trying to preserve, his sister's memory by that because in showing that she actually did steal it, that's what would be on everybody's mind.
Right. Right. She would not have the. She would not be remembered fondly, and
Now,
she cared very much for Apu. They were
she
very
did.
close.
Now, my favorite character in this entire movie is the aunt.
She's great, isn't she?
She is got this has got to be rubbing up against 100. I mean, she's got to be approaching 100 years old.
The
This
actress
poor
was
woman.
83.
The actress was 83. She looks like she's 102,
Yeah, she does.
but she's so funny because she's so old, but she's so mischievous.
Mm-hmm.
She's always around, and she's always stealing fruit, or she's always taking things they're while
She
they're
takes things
making.
from the kitchen, and yeah, yeah.
But you see her just kind of crouch down because she can't walk straight up and can't walk upright anymore.
Right, she's completely hunched over,
Right.
like, at the hips. Like, she is bent in half.
But she is. In all the sadness that goes on in this little house in this little commune. She's like this. She's so happy all the time. I just
Mm-hmm.
loved her.
Mm-hmm.
It's like because you keep seeing her in the background and you're thinking, what kind of mischief is she going off to get into?
She was a lot of fun. Her death was very, very sad.
Yeah. Whenever an elderly person in a movie says, "I need to sit down,"
That means they're dying. Yeah.
or "I need water,"
Mm-hmm.
that's yeah. But and I was so sad, because you see them taking the body off,
Mm-hmm.
and it was so sad because I'm thinking this this woman spent her last days not in misery, but she found a way in all of this misery to make herself happy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to to put some light in her spirit, as it were. And I so loved her, and I hated to see her go. I really did because you
Yeah.
knew at the end of the movie she wasn't. You knew she wasn't going to make it to the end of the movie. But
Right. Apparently, in the book, she dies like really, really early on.
mm,
But Ray changed it because he knew that she was a sympathetic character and he
yeah,
liked having her around. He loved the actress. So,
and it's a nice contrast because there's
hmm,
so much going on. When the sister died, when
oh,
Durga died, that surprised me.
yeah,
That was heartbreaking.
hmm.
Um, very little happens to this family. It's wow.
Like I
Because
told you before we started, tragedy stalks this kid like he is the tastiest morsel in, in existence.
and even when the series is over, you're not sure that it's done with him yet. Um, but the end of the movie, because the father, again, is well-meaning but not a great provider. Because he's constantly in and out of work. He's gone for long periods of time.
He wasn't
Um,
even there when Durga died
he wasn't even there when Durga died. He just found out when he came back.
because he brought a surrey for her and
Mm.
the Sarbajaya, that's how you say her name, Sarbajaya, just breaks up and starts crying when she's presented with this new garment for her daughter, and she's trying to hold it together and it just doesn't.
I was actually surprised because um, I'm sitting there in my living room last night by myself, and I just said, I think I said out loud, "Oh, he doesn't know."
Yeah.
And eventually, it comes down to they do have to leave,
Hmm.
and eventually they do have to leave, and it's sad that they have to leave their ancestral home, but it's a good thing
Hmm.
because they can go and they can leave and go make a better living for themselves. They're on the ox cart at the very end of the movie,
Hmm.
and they're sad faces, and I'm thinking it's sad that you're leaving your home, but it's also a good thing. It's also a good thing, and
Yeah, because you don't have to be faced with the terrible memories and.
right, right, and you can start over.
Hmm.
So
Until
until Aparito,
Aparajito or
Aparajito, excuse
Aparajito,
me,
uh, where they do move to uh,
they moved to the
nearby
city.
city um, that has a name that I cannot recall off the top of my head.
She gets work. The mother gets work as a maid,
Cook.
a cook, right? But she gets work,
Hmm.
and the father is working as a priest. And again, he takes money from the. He basically has a collection plate,
Hmm.
and he's taking money from the pilgrims.
And he's doing rather well.
Mhm. Until yeah,
Until he gets sick and gets a fever, looks like he's going to be on the mend, calls for water from the Ganges. It gets poured down his throat, his eyes bug out, and he dies.
hmm
Harihar dies.
yeah,
Um, and that's in the first half of the movie.
yeah, and Apu is now a teenager.
Right. When we see him, he's about 10, and he's goofing off. He wants to go to school. Then, after the father dies, he does get to go to school,
Right,
and
he
he
becomes a
becomes a
rebellious
model
teenager.
student. Yeah. He becomes a model student. He also becomes an asshole.
Yeah,
He is terrible. He's like Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix bad.
hmm
Like he is just a brat kid at this point. Like I get it. Your aunt who's basically like a grandmother to you, your sister and your father are all dead. Now it's just you and your smothering mother. You're gonna try to push back from that.
your mother who works and reflects on how crummy her life is,
Mhm.
and you are adding insult to injury by being a jerk.
Yeah.
And he's like,
So
but he does well in school.
he does, and he's asked to he's given a scholarship to go study in Calcutta, um, which would leave his mother alone.
Right.
Now, what they've done is they've moved from the city to her uncle's place, which looks a lot like their old ancestral home, but
I, I
kept up.
actually, I actually thought they had moved back for a
Me
while.
too, but they didn't. It was her uncle's place, and he has some money,
Mhm.
and he goes away a lot as well. Uh, but he actually makes money,
And
and
you reflect how again, and I hate to do this, but being comparable to the Western situation is that when you don't have money and you don't work, you go get a job to make money. You go to the job listings and you take your experience and you go. In this culture, in the circumstances they're living under, you can't just do that.
Mm-hmm.
It almost seems based on this movie like that kind of thing happens by the will of chance.
Mm-hmm.
You just happen to know somebody who needs laundry done, or you just happen to know somebody who needs cooking done, or you
Right.
just happen you know somebody who knows somebody. That's it is that way in the United States, but not to this degree.
Right.
And getting out of your social class is nearly impossible
Oh yeah.
unless you marry somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really what I got from this series, what I got from these three films. It's sort of it's a window on a culture that, to my experience, is alien to my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Satyjit Ray, and I've not seen his other films, famously said, "I want to find what is unique in the Indian experience."
Mm-hmm.
And in the films of this series, in these three films, I'm seeing that. I'm seeing what is unique in how you get an education, in how you get work, in how you get married.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not westernized in any way possible, in any way at all, because it is. And this is the same thing. And I apologize if I'm rambling, but when I see films like this, I want to see their experience. It's like I always say to my wife when we go out, because my wife loves different kinds of food, and when we go out for different kinds of food, whether it be Indian food, Japanese food, Mexican food, whatever it is, I want to sample their culture, what
Mm-hmm.
they eat. Don't Americanize it for me because I can't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
I demand the same of film. And one of the reasons I'm glad that you suggested this series is because this is one of the purest films I've ever seen
Mm-hmm.
from this part of the world. Um, because you learn things, you learn a lot of things, and you see how they live, you see what they had to go through,
Mm-hmm.
what they have to go through. Now, this is, of course, a century ago, but you can say that very little has changed. But it's very interesting the way that these cultures operate, the way that things happen. When he goes to school, it's interesting because in another filmmaker, I think would have had Apu be a failure, not doing
Yeah.
well in class, not doing, being mischievous and getting into trouble and what have you. Um, but he's not. He's a very
No.
good student.
Right. His way of acting out is to get the education that no one in his family has ever really had.
Right, right. And that's another thing is getting a first generation education, being
Mm-hmm.
the first in your family to get that kind of to get an education. And did you notice? I also noticed how casually he takes this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, me, I'd be excited. I'd be tickled to death. If my professors absolutely loved me and just thought I was wonderful. Because I kept thinking also of when we talked about Amercord, of how um, mean the teachers were,
Mm-hmm.
and how they were portrayed as a grotesque. They're not here.
No.
That's not here.
No, they're very supportive here.
They're very supportive. He wants to be a writer,
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, as this happens all through this series, the winds of chance are not with him.
No.
In particular, because eventually his mother dies. Um,
He's about 17,
yeah,
and he makes some excuse that he can't come home, and she wants him to come home over a break.
there's almost like
And
a conflict over whether or not he's going to come home, and whether he's writing and things like that.
right, and then he gets notice that she's ill,
Mm.
and he goes back and kind of finds her there. And that you see him break up because he realizes how he treated her,
Yeah,
and the one constant in his life all the way through is now gone.
yeah,
He is now alone in the world. And so he packs up after the memorial service, or he's going to do the memorial service in Calcutta. He says, I've got exams," and he
yeah.
just picks up and you
As a
just
young
watch
man
him
would.
walking off, and it's it's heartbreaking, but it's also it's something that I think he learned from his sisters. You grieve and move on.
Yeah, which he doesn't really learn in the third one.
Well, no, because that was his breaking point. Um, Apur Sansar, uh, it starts off he's struggling as a writer in Calcutta, but he's happy-ish.
This,
He leaves school because he doesn't have enough money to continue on.
I'm gonna say that Aparito, if I'm ranking these three, is probably my least favorite because it's really just about the story is really just about him and his mother.
That one didn't do as well at the box office as the first and third.
The Apur Sansar is, and this is going to be a weird phrase. It feels the most written.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
the
Technically,
first one felt more like an observation. This one feels like it's more written.
right. Upper Sunsar is definitely the more crafted.
Yeah,
Um, Not only that, the everything that went into it had there was more money, there was more time, there was more focus.
right.
Pather Panchali took 3 years to shoot and edit after running into budget problems and all kinds of different things. The music was composed in a day by Ravi Shankar.
Yeah, one 11 hour session.
Yeah,
I don't
which
I don't know because he had a busy schedule.
right, he had a concert the next day in the town, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll do the music," and so he watched a rough cut or part of a rough cut, and just wrote basically incidental music and as much of it as he could, and Ray had to put that in, and the same thing happened with Aparajito, um, that he did not have the time, um, but for Apur Sansar he did. He was able to commit something like a few weeks to it. So there's music where there should be music. Aparajito or Aparajito, however, I wish I knew how to definitively say it. Um,
Forgive us if we're bungling that.
that one has a lot of stretches where there should be music, but there just wasn't because Shankar didn't write it. So there was nothing to put in where he needed it.
Well, also I don't know. I don't know the career of Ravi Shankar. I think he was just really getting started at this point.
He was getting very popular.
He's getting very popular. He wasn't known probably to the Western world until the 1960s. He played at Woodstock.
He did play at Woodstock. He taught George Harrison how to play the sitar,
Mm.
and that's George Harrison picking up the sitar and seeking him out is what brought him to the minds of the Western civilization.
Mm. And he lived a long time. He died at 92. He was in 2012. I think he passed
Hmm.
away. But it was interesting. It was really interesting to hear his name come up in conjunction with this because
Hmm.
I was listening to something. I was like, wow, the music is by Ravi Shankar. That adds a level
It
in my
does.
mind. That adds a level because wow, I can connect with that
Yeah.
because I know him.
Hmm.
We know Ravi Shankar. Um, but this film, the Apur Sansar, the story is very interesting. It's
Yeah.
very well put together, but it is also still unpredictable.
Hmm.
It. I can imagine if you wrote this story in America, it would have been written as a comedy
Hmm.
because he is invited to a wedding by his friend Hulu,
Uh huh.
his college buddy, and they go out there and they're going to the wedding, and there's something to do with the the bride has to get married at this point because something about the stars are in
Evi-
alignment.
Evidently, it's a Hindustani practice where a matchmaker appoints a specific hour
She's got to
um,
get married.
that she's got to be married within, or she will be unsuitable for marriage for the rest of her life. So there's this
Wow.
1 hour during the day and the corresponding hour at night. And if she doesn't get married, this 13-year-old girl
I
will
was about to say
never be
14. Yeah.
permitted to marry.
Yeah.
13, 14-year-old girl. She was actually supposed to be about 17. She was 13 or 14, the
Yeah.
actress, but she was supposed to look older, and she kind of did in some light.
Yeah.
And, uh, because they don't really get married until they're 17, 18 years old, but they're arranged out that young. Um,
And I don't think she knew who she was marrying.
no,
Um,
it was an arranged marriage. She had never
they
seen the guy, and then on the trip there, they found out that he's he's mad.
stark raving mad. He's mentally unstable.
And so the only other person there that's not related to any of them
Is Apu.
is Apu. And they're like, please, you have to do this, or she won't be able to be allowed to get married ever. And he's like,
That's harsh. You're 13 years old, and if you don't get married today at noon, the door is closed
for the rest of
for
your
the rest
life.
of your life. But based on the way this series is going, the rest of her life is I have no idea
Well, people
because
don't stay in Apu's life very long, like I said. So
right, exactly,
he gets a few months with her,
yeah,
and they're happy.
and they're happy. He loves her. She's
It's
writing. She's teasing him in her letters.
right as she like they're together. They're very happy. They move into this. They go back to his room, his hovel of a room. But then she starts to spruce it up. She starts to change it from a bachelor pad into a young married couple's apartment. And
As happens.
right, and he's falling in love with her. She's becoming devoted to him. She's actually they actually like each other.
You know
This
what I
is
thought of?
becoming. Go ahead.
Because you're always looking for connections in this film. Is that there's a joke that goes around because I work in a store where we buy old items, things
Mm,
like that. And this guy, this gentleman comes in and he sold to us about probably 150 records,
Hmm.
vinyl record albums, and we thought, oh, he's got a girlfriend. So it's like, she changes the space that he lives in.
Hmm.
It's like it's no longer you, it's now us.
Hmm.
So I'm like, that's universal. That's not just
Yeah.
in
And
this culture.
so they're starting to be pretty happy, and then
Yeah.
she decides she's going to go spend she's pregnant and she's going to spend the last 2 months of the pregnancy at her parents because there's more room. It'll be easier. He'll be able to save money. And then he sees his brother-in-law at his house.
Whilst he's still getting letters from her.
Right, he has one last letter from her that he keeps getting interrupted while he's trying to read. He finally finishes reading it. He looks up from the letter and sees the brother-in-law, who sort of kind of gets out that she died during childbirth, and then he gets punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
And Apu just spirals.
He goes into a downward spiral,
Deep
a
depression.
deep depression. What I really, because I was having trouble sort of getting into his mindset. The child lives. It's a
Mm-hmm.
son. And I forget, is it Kalik? Um,
Mm,
yeah, I cannot remember the child's name, but
Kajal.
Kajal. Kajal. He blames the child,
For the death of
the mother.
whose name is Aparna.
Right, Aparna. It's silly, but in his grief, he blames the child, and he doesn't want anything to do with the child. So he's going to send it away to the grandparents.
Right. Well, he keeps it. He never actually sees it. He just leaves it at the grandparents.
And he goes to
A
all these
wandering.
different corners of
He,
India.
he goes a wandering.
Yeah,
Um, and he's doing whatever he can to shirk the responsibility of being a father,
right.
which kind of feels like his own father
Right.
to a point. Although you could tell that Harihar really loved his children
Mm-hmm. And his wife.
and his wife, and he was genuinely trying to do something good for them, but at the same time couldn't curb his wanderlust to stay and really help. You know,
Do
he could
anything
have been
significant.
he could have been getting money as a priest while fixing that hole in the wall in the border wall,
Right.
or thatching the roof, or you know,
Or just hanging around, or just staying around being a father.
yeah. So there's a lot of parallels. He learned parenthood from his father and not from his mother.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he just struggles. He's convinced by his friend and I
Hulu.
guess now cousin-in-law, yeah, Hulu, um, to come back and to claim the son. And he finally goes back. He feels like he's doing his duty by sending money every once in a while.
Yeah, like his father did.
Right. And he goes back and tries to introduce himself to his son. His son won't accept him because why should he? It's been 5 years. He's a 5-year-old and he never saw his father.
Right.
Like there are some really heartbreaking moments where he says, my father will beat you up, and he say the guy makes some kind of comment like we haven't seen his pigtails around here, and poor little Kajal goes, "Do fathers wear pigtails?" And I was near tears.
Yeah.
Like he does not know what a father is because he's never met his, but he's told about him. So it's so heartbreaking, and when he finally does take responsibility and he wants to take Kajal with him, it's the first time you can actually go, wow, there's a happy moment that isn't tarnished and ended. Well, it's kind of tarnished by death, but it's not ended by death.
Well,
At least not immediately, not on screen.
they are together, and now I had read a little bit about this series. The movie ends with he's got um, the son is on his shoulders and he's walking off, and they're happy together. I had read that Ray had never intended for this to be a trilogy.
Right, no, he didn't.
Um, he actually never really intended it to be anything more than just Pather Panchali.
Hmm.
He and when he got to the second one, whatever you call it, when he got to the second one, he didn't think he had enough material
Hmm.
for the third one. And I'm thinking, you're writing a story about a life. You've got enough material for five movies.
Well, he didn't want to overplay his hand,
Right.
and
That's true. Yeah.
he wanted to find a story that would be worth putting on screen. And I guess when he was doing press for one of his other movies, it was either Aparajito when it was coming out, or one of the two that he did in between Aparajito and
Music Room.
Music Room, and there was another one that was like a comedy. Music Room is remarkable. That will be an episode. Um,
I tried to get that one from Netflix. I was going to watch that one.
so good.
Every
Um,
time I get a Satyjit Ray movie from, I tried to get any number of other films from him. It's always on Netflix. It's very long wait.
mhm. Because they probably only have like one copy.
Yeah.
Um, and like most people, when they get something in a foreign language film, they'll go, "Well, I'll get to that," and
I'll
then it
get to it
sits there.
eventually. Yeah.
Yeah. um, but he he said in a press conference of one of those films, somebody asked him if there was going to be another part to this, and he, without even thinking about it, and absent-mindedly went, "Yeah, sure." And then he went off and made, I think, the Music Room, and then he was like, I need a new something else, and he remembered that he had said there was going to be a third part, so we went back to the book Aparajito and found this section. So this is somewhere in the sequel book.
There could have been a fourth.
There could have been a fourth, fifth, and sixth,
Because, yeah,
probably.
that's what I'm saying. Because you could have made a story about him actually raising the child, and then you could have made, assuming the son would have lived,
Yeah,
because people in Apu's hemisphere don't live very long. That's the through line of this theory.
right, yeah.
And you could have made one about the son getting married, conflicts and what have you. And you could have made one
You,
about
you could have
Apu's
ended up
later
with him
years,
being the old bent uncle being taken care of by
right? Becoming the
the kid.
mischievous aunt,
Right,
essentially.
right, 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 right.
And
Because you know he
essentially,
has that in him.
I just felt like when I saw this, I felt like I was seeing half of the story. It's like we're there when he's born,
Hmm.
and I thought, wouldn't it have been fitting if there'd have been a last one where he passed away, and
Hmm.
we see the impact he had on his family, on the
And
family.
the way that Ray shot these, he definitely could have done that within a few years
Yeah,
because he did not cast the same person as Apu
right,
twice.
right. It's not like what's the character that Truffaut,
It's not Antoine Doinel.
Antoine
It's
Tonnell, yeah,
who was always played by Jean Pierre Léaud. Um, over the course of 12 years,
right.
or actually close to 20 years. Um, so no, he could have easily even recast the person that plays Apu in Apur Sansar because they ended up with a very long and fruitful collaboration.
Mhm.
Sumitra Chatterjee
Yeah,
ended up being in something like 6 or 7 other Ray films after first appearing in Apur Sansar.
yeah.
So they got to be very close in their working relationship. Theoretically, they could have gone back to it, but I think he just wanted to end on
And on a
something
high note.
strong. Yeah, and on a high note. Because after all this death, there's a lot of death.
Yeah, the mortality rate in this movie is
I mean, you talk about movies like, Kill Bill or The Terminator or whatever having a high body count, but
Mhm.
for the comparatively low amount of characters,
Yeah,
the body count is arguably higher in,
right.
in these, because literally the only person left from the first one, the only character left from the first one in the third one is Apu.
Is Apu, yeah,
That's
that
it.
lives.
Yeah, that lives. And we don't know how long.
Mhm.
He could have died 6 feet up the road after carrying the kid and realizing, oh no, and his heart gives out and the kid's an orphan all of a sudden again.
Suddenly he's alone again.
Like, so I
But it is, despite that, remarkable because you are seeing the flow, the ebb and flow of a life
hmm
happening that is probably different than your own experience.
hmm
I assume the people listening to our podcast probably are Westerners. But you see this, it's alien to your experience. It's
hmm
alien to what you know. Um, but in a lot of ways, it's very similar because he grows up, mischievous kid, goes to school, does well, graduates, gets married. There's triumph and tragedy in his life. It's up and down. That's how life is.
hmm
But it's uniquely in this culture.
hmm
You learn things about this culture.
Right.
You learn what a priest does. You learn what the pilgrims are. You learn what people do for a living.
hmm
You learn what sweet lentil balls are. You know,
And it should be worth noting that, this was your first exposure to this. So I was running a gambit because there are two ways to look at these films. They are not. Pather Panchali was not universally accepted as a masterpiece. Bosley Crowther, who was the New York Times film critic and Stick in the Mud,
yeah.
hated it, said it was amateurish. Francois Truffaut said the words, I didn't want to spend 2 hours watching peasants eat with their fingers. Yeah, I was appalled at his racism there.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, then you get somebody like Akira Kurosawa, who says, not to have seen the cinema of Ray means existing on the world without seeing the sun or the moon. That is high praise indeed, especially from Kurosawa,
Mhm.
who they both had a great admiration for each other. Um,
This was
when
early in Ray's career.
this is his first,
They did
his first film was Pather Panchali in 1955.
when they turned the cameras on this film. They didn't know what they were doing,
No,
and what they got was a miracle.
well, I think Ray knew what to do, but didn't know what to do all at the same time because he
Right.
had been studying. He was a cinephile, loved Hollywood cinema, loved Western classical music,
Mhm.
read every book he could get his hands on. When he finally was able to get into some spaces and see a whole bunch of movies. He grew up in Calcutta, in the richer part of Calcutta.
He grew up in love with Western movies. He loved
Hmm.
with American movies. He loved Billy Wilder.
Hmm.
He wrote Billy Wilder a letter.
Right, and got to meet him. John
Right.
Huston introduced him to him.
Mm.
Because John Huston showed up, he was scouting locations for The Man Who Would Be King when he was going to make it with Humphrey Bogart in the 50s, but he didn't end up making it until the 70s with Sean Connery and Michael Caine.
Mm.
Um, but he was in India and he ended up seeing like the first half hour of Pather Panchali unsubtitled,
Mm.
and he was like, "This is a great picture." Like he was really impressed with it, uh, and they got to be friendly. And when Ray got to go to the States, he got to have a screening with Houston and a whole bunch of other people, George Stevens, and all these people were seeing his movie with him, and he was just in heaven.
Yeah. The impact that Ray had globally. Because anybody who really goes in and looks at his films are usually you don't forget you do not forget what you've seen.
No, no,
I mean, even the writers of The Simpsons were all collectively fans of his work.
mm-hmm,
They named Apu after this trilogy.
yeah,
That's where he gets his name,
mm-hmm,
and it was a tribute to him. And um, he was so beloved
mm-hmm,
worldwide. I mean, he was just. They remembered him at the Oscars before he died. I mean,
mm-hmm.
he was on his deathbed when they gave him his Oscar, and it was amazing. It's just the influence that American films had on him. But yet he wanted to make films as we do, as we make films about the American experience. He wanted to make films about the Indian
Right,
experience,
because he hated at the time contemporary Bengali cinema.
right? Because
He
it was mostly swashbucklers and romantic,
and bad
things.
sci-fi and just things with stars, things that you know would just make money, and they were not
They were
indicative of the
genre
culture.
films.
Yeah, they were they were American films translated and filmed in and with Bengali actors and languages.
I don't think that I can't imagine what he would have thought of the Bollywood movement. I don't. I think he would have rejected it because I think
It's hard to
um,
say because he was alive. He died just before the big explosion, but
now I thought
I
the big explosion happened around the millennium.
mm, early to mid '90s, Lagan in '92, that 4 hour long
That's
uh,
why I can't do
Hindi
Bollywood because
musical.
that's why I can't do Bollywood because a lot of them just God, they're 9 hours long.
Lagan is really good though.
There's a because I a couple of years ago I fell in love with Sita Sings the Blues.
Hmm.
Just I cannot talk about that on this show because it is such a visual experience. I fell in love with that film so much that I wanted to go back and watch the story, the original play that they had done for television in India. And then I realized it was 12 hours long. And Cena Sings the Blues runs at a brisk 88 minutes.
Yeah. Look, when you are in a culture that is largely not based on wealth, you want to get as much bang for your buck as you can.
Right.
So they make sure that you are getting your ticket price worth
Mm.
when you go into these movies.
Their view of America is wonderful. I love their view of America. It's just like,
I wish America was what their view of America is.
it's like I remember there was one movie where it took place in New York. It took place in New York, and I'm thinking, wow, New York looks a lot like Vancouver.
New York often is Vancouver in the movies.
Yeah, I don't do too much Bollywood because I pretty much know what I'm getting. You know,
But there are often some surprises. It's something that I consider a blind spot for myself, but also one that I'd be interested in if anybody listening has any recommendations for the good Bollywood stuff that is not just a rehash of everything else.
right?
Much like, see, Bollywood is a lot like Hollywood. They make the same kind of stuff over and over again.
Make what sells.
Yeah. So, if anybody out there knows some of the highlights of Bollywood, I would be personally ecstatic.
The only one I could recommend that I absolutely enjoyed was a movie called Bride and Prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I will say it was a nice big confection. Um, it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that I'm completely sold on Bollywood, but
I make it a point to never outrightly reject any kind of film, and I know you don't either. Uh, that just I know that there are diamonds in the rough of things that are just, and it might just not be something that
I'll make
is
a
in my
confession to you.
wheelhouse.
I'll make a confession to you. If I go into a movie, doesn't matter what it is. If I go into the the movie that has been derided as the worst thing of all time, whenever I go into any movie, in my head, in my little brain up here, it has 4 stars before it starts. As the movie goes along, the stars begin to twitter away. And then, because I am optimistic, I'm going to go into anything thinking I have no idea what's in front of me. So, unless they're just generally movies that I typically avoid, I will say that I do typically avoid anything involving Adam Sandler because I've been burned by that before, and I'm like, I don't. I know what I'm getting. I don't need anything. I don't need anything else.
You don't always know what you're getting with Adam Sandler, but
But
depending on who's directing it, if it's his company, then yeah, stay away from it.
usually, yeah. But I mean, there's very rarely will I ever just say, I absolutely will not see that. I'll try pretty much anything.
See, I'll watch anything. I'm not a huge fan of torture porn,
I'm not either.
um, but I think the way that you and I approach things are differently. I approach it with I go in and the movie already has 2.5 stars. It's mediocre.
Thrill me.
Yeah, and either do better or do worse, and it'll either go up or down
So you're
as it
sitting in the
impresses
middle,
me.
waiting for it to go one way or the other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm sitting at the
I
top of
go
the
in
hill.
neutral.
I'm sitting at the top of the hill, and it starts to whittle away. And as it whittles away, I slide down the hill.
So
That's
you went
kind of
up a
where I am.
mountain and come down a molehill.
Right, right. Because I have no idea. Because again, you have no idea. That's why I can't stand it when people outright reject something.
Oh, like, I won't watch movies with subtitles. I won't watch black and white movies. It's like,
Yeah,
why?
I don't watch movies with actors I've never heard of. Well, eventually, at one point you did.
Yeah, it's something that I have to deal with my son a lot because he's high functioning, but he's on the autism spectrum. So he is much happier to just stay with what he knows,
Mm,
with what he was introduced to when he
comfort
was
zones.
little. Right. So getting him to branch out and watch a new movie is very difficult. He's like, "Well, I don't want to watch that because I haven't seen it before." It's like, "Well, you hadn't seen your other favorite movies before you watched them either the first time." So he's like, but you know, it's it's a work in progress with him. But
The social media. Let me tell you something. The social media crowd fascinates me. Um, I refuse to see anything directed by so and so, and I'm thinking, just shut up and watch the movie, okay? It's like,
Right, like I get if you're uh, if you're avoiding a person's work because of deeds, misdeeds, and actions that they've done in their real life, like
or
avoiding
they just
Kevin.
persistently make crappy movies.
Well, there's that too. Um, but if you say, I'm not going to watch Roman Polanski movies because he raped a teenager. Okay, that's you've got a good reason to not support this person, even though he
I
made some
can't
great
watch.
movies.
Yeah,
Right,
I
you're
can't watch
just
American Beauty.
right. Yeah, no, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to watch American Beauty again. I had trouble. The only reason I really liked Baby Driver was because he dies
Yeah,
in a brutal, wonderful fashion.
yeah.
Like,
Well, the funny thing is, it's like last year, I did a project for my blog, my Best Picture project, and the entry for American Beauty dropped on the exact same day
oh,
that the news about Kevin Spacey happened. I mean, it dropped that day. It's kind of like Louis C.K. when that movie came out when he got in trouble, and the movie
mm-hmm,
came out like the next day,
yeah.
where he was obsessed with his 17-year-old daughter, and it happened that day. It was like the timing was just weird.
And unfortunate for him, but I,
Mhm.
I still haven't watched that movie.
Oh, I did
I
because I
got
had to
it.
review it.
Um, but yeah, I guess we can move into recommendations now. Um, I think my recommendation is watch Satyajit Ray's movies, specifically The Music Room.
We'll start
Um,
with the Apu Trilogy.
yeah, start with the Apu trilogy. Actually, The Music Room. Well, no, Pather Panchali was my first. Um,
9-2.
and uh, some of his stuff in the '80s isn't as good.
Mhm.
Um, but nothing he's made. I'm not a completist. I haven't seen everything he's done. Um, just maybe about five, six, maybe at the most seven movies of his. Uh, but he always has something interesting, an interesting character, an interesting look. Something is going on that is always well worth watching, even if you're not identifying with the story.
They're unpredictable.
They are. So what
And
do you
I'm
have?
only speaking from the three films that I've seen, but they are very unpredictable.
Yes. What recommendations do you have?
I'm gonna sound like a dumb American because I can only recommend the ones that I've seen. I would absolutely recommend the Apu trilogy. Um, but the two films that I mentioned, Bride and Prejudice, is a lot of fun, and I'm gonna post a link to this because it's available online. Sita Sings the Blues. It is one of my favorite films of all time. I absolutely love it. I've seen it at least 20 times.
Hmm.
I am passionately in love with it. It was made by an American
Mm-hmm.
who her husband left her to go accept a job in India, Nina Paley,
Mm-hmm.
and she began reading the Ramayana
Mm-hmm.
and made this movie, which it's an animated movie telling the story, but it's done with every kind of um, animated style that is available to her.
Mm-hmm.
She uses shadow puppets, she uses animation, she uses all these different. She uses rotoscoping, and it's all done with this wonderful jazz soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
I can't describe it enough, and I can't love it enough, and I can't recommend it enough.
Very good. What do we have coming up?
All right, Spinach Chin. Next week we we are flipping the table over. Next week, we're going to do something fun. I want to talk about the Three Stooges. Not specifically just the Three Stooges. I want to talk about on 4 occasions when the Three Stooges dealt with the Nazis at the time when the Nazis were goose stepping all over Europe.
And boy, did they deal with them.
Yeah. We're talking about
These are fun.
We're talking about You Nasty Spy, its sequel, I'll Never Heil Again. We're talking about a very strange short called They Stooged to Conga. And the final one is Back to the Front,
Mm-hmm.
which Doug has been introduced to all of these recently.
Yes.
Because they don't show them on television.
No. No, I didn't. I was unaware of these. These were. I just watched all 4 of them this past week. Actually, 2 of them yesterday. So.
As I was putting them on the roster.
Right. They're a lot of fun. What do we have coming up after that?
What do we have coming up after that? After we get the Stooges, I always forget. Hold on.
Have we not heard the chimes at midnight?
Oh, is that what that was?
Yes. we're breaking into Wells. I gave you 3 weeks on your book. Now we're getting 3 non-consecutive weeks on my book.
It is the Chimes of Midnight, which I have not seen.
Yeah.
And then the week after that, we're dancing back into Disney.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to talk about Mary Poppins and its sequel, which I've not seen yet.
It's pretty good. It's not great, but it's good. And then after that, we're doing Orson Welles' Lady from Shanghai.
Mm-hmm.
And then starts franchise month.
Not yet.
Oh no! Then there's one more week in April.
Because we're going to talk about a movie that I have only seen once.
Me too.
It is George Lucas's directorial debut, THX 1138,
Mm-hmm.
based on his student film. Then we get into May, and it's Star Wars month.
Yay.
We're talking about all 8 Star Wars movies, and I'm looking forward to that.
Me
so
too.
That's what we got coming up.
Me too. And then, just as to telegraph a little bit further out, our first episode in June is our 100th episode,
mm-hmm.
which we're very proud of, and we're going to be talking about. We're capping off my 3 weeks of Wells with Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane, yep.
So it's going to be one of those episodes where we say, we have to talk about this, but we don't know what we're going to say.
Because Citizen Kane, I swear I have like 3 DVDs of that movie. Because they just keep coming into my life, you know.
So that's what we have coming up. You can find all of our back episodes on www.thepodbaydoorspodcast.wordpress.com. Almost forgot where all of our stuff was. You can find us on Twitter at pod_bay. You can throw a tip into our virtual tip jar at Patreon at pod_bay. We thank you very much for listening, and the Pod Bay doors are now closed.
The mission has been completed.